My name is Mike Cahill, and I was president of the Oregon Association of Chiefs of Police from 1998 to 1999. And I was the chief of police in Eregan, Oregon, Junction City while I was president of the association, and in Vernonia, Oregon. In 1998 and 1999, America was fairly busy in the Balkans region in former Yugoslavia. And we had successfully brought everything to a truce. And in that truce, part of that pact was to help Kosovo, Croatia, Bosnia-Herzegovina, and Serbia to develop their law enforcement programs. So at that time, the impact that had on Oregon was we had retiring police officers here in the state. One was Ken Davis, an associate member of the Chiefs Association, who was one of the first members of our association to go to and be a part of a peacekeeping mission and developing the police in the Balkans. And Ken worked at Mitrovica South Bridge Police Station, and he worked a full year there. And he came home and passed away the following Friday from when he came home from a blood clot that they believe he got from sitting in the airplane for so many hours. And it was traumatic for a lot of the people that were keeping track of Ken because it was the early days of the internet, you might remember. And so that's how we kept in touch with Ken. And he was supposed to meet his wife Nancy for lunch at the Ram restaurant here in Salem. And he didn't show up. And he had passed away at the house. And so Ken was kind of a mentor of mine. He had started at the same police agency in Hermiston as I had started, and he grew up in Stanfield, Oregon. Here in America, wow, we were getting prepared for Y2K. Remember that? Everybody was afraid that all the computers were going to crash and things were going to go bad, and because when you roll from 1999 to 2000 on the computer, everything was going to fail. Nobody had planned this. So out of that, a lot of planning, strategic thinking, planning went on in every imaginable organization, whether you were a business or a government. You were involved in trying to find ways to minimize whatever the impact might be, that nobody knew what it would be, to your particular entity. And like everyone else in Oregon, we were all focused on trying to find ways to develop software or get software experts in to look at your particular agency's programs to make sure they didn't crash and all that data you had developed in your regional information systems didn't just evaporate. Yeah. The fear of the unknown, I think, was there. And then it rolled around to year 2000 and everything seemed to be pretty good. A few glitches here and there, but nothing nearly as horrible as everybody had thought. Here in Oregon, Measure 67 was a pretty big deal. And that was the Medical Marijuana Act. And we as an association had really prided ourselves in staying out of most political activities. But as a political action committee, our political action committee was fairly straightforward about our feelings, and that it was going to be very hard for us to talk to kids in the classroom with the DARE program and the various classroom programs, and to tell kids that drugs were bad if, in fact, Oregonians legalized medical marijuana, because then it would be thought of as a medicine. And so there was a little bit of a conundrum for us as police and law enforcement officers who are focused so much on kids and safety that it was hard when 54% of the voters in Oregon voted it in. And so we had to kind of rethink our ways and means. And I think one of the positive things that came out of that with the Chiefs Association and the Victory Group was the development of Parent Aid. And that program, I think it may still be going on today with the Chiefs Association, was paramount in at least giving the parents an opportunity to identify whether there was a problem in their family and do it anonymously, and help create that, I don't know, self-discipline that you have to learn to develop in your family, that maybe as a whole we can be strong together versus individual pieces of a family trying to make it through life. And Parent Aid, I think, is a great functional activity to do that, and it's affordable, and it's something the Chiefs Association could do. And what's really interesting is every president that comes into office has a geographical obstacle or advantage. For instance, Jim Jones, Ontario, Oregon. He has to drive. Now, he's been president twice of the association before he passed away. He had to drive from Ontario, Oregon to Salem. Well, just think about it. If you do it on the interstate, you're talking 6, 7, 8 hours. If you do it across Highway 20, across the belt of the state, you're talking about more time. So it's a day getting here for him, a day getting back, and however much time he spends here in Salem talking to whoever he talks to or dealing with whatever meetings you have to deal with. Then you take a chief that's as close as Silverton, Oregon, who can be here in 30 minutes to testify on a bill or something that's emerging and needs to be done right then and there. So what Jim Jones and chiefs that are geographically far away have done is rely upon those people in the chairs that are coming up. And it's that piece of our association that is so good at developing new presidents, is getting them involved at the treasurer, vice president, secretary positions early on, and get them involved in the committees before then, so they can actually start learning the ropes. What I found the association became very good at doing was working with our partners, state police and the Oregon Sheriff's Association, and to a lesser degree the Oregon Peace Officers Association. But I think one of the examples was window tinting. So window tinting came out in the 70s. In the late 70s, there was people putting silver window tint on their windows, people putting black window tint on their windows, and there was really no regulation anywhere about what you could do other than what the federal law said about window tinting. And it was becoming frustrating because as a pedestrian, if you're trying to look into the window of a car that's parked at an intersection at the crosswalk, you can't see through that window because of the window tint. So you can't see if that driver sees you as a pedestrian. And as you know, in Oregon, it rains. So during a nice bright day, you might have a lot of rain. And so that slows down the ability to interact with the driver of the vehicle, because you got to try to get their attention before you take that step out into that crosswalk, because you don't know if they can see you or not. So Oregon, the Chiefs Association, the Sheriff's Association, and the Oregon State Police all got together, and we came to the agreement, along with the industry, that we had to have standards, and the standards had to be reasonable. You had to have the ability of the industry to provide a product that helped people. And so we have a medical piece that allows doctors to issue prescriptions for window tint on all the windows. Under certain conditions, they're limited to drive because of how dark it is. But some people have skin conditions where they need to have the window tint or they can't even go out. And then you have the need for air conditioners to be effective and not use too much fuel. So that's why the Department of Transportation allows sport utility vehicles to have darkened windows on the windows behind the driver and passenger seats. And because it reduces the use of fuel, because the engine's not having to work as hard to keep the air conditioner running as often. So we have that variance, and we have the medical allowance. But the industry still wants to sell tint. They want to tint automotive windows. And so we had to find a balance. So we actually had the window tint industry partner with us, brought in some cars, tinted them up in different variations, brought them in the daytime, drove them right in front of the Capitol steps, and we went down as a group from the various agencies and looked at the cars and said, you know, this probably works, but this person could hide a firearm fairly easily without us seeing if they were here. But if the rear window isn't tinted, that lets enough light in for us to see in. So there was a lot of thought and purpose put into the law. So much so that we wanted to make sure that everybody understood the importance it was to law enforcement safety and to pedestrian safety and bicyclists to be able to see that person driving the car and to see into the car from the road, that we had it read into the record. And it's my understanding that Craig Campbell read it into the record on behalf of the legislature, the entire statute. So it's there forever. And the intent, the legislative intent. And that was a piece of work that we did collectively as an association with our other brother and sister association members. And the reason I focused on that is because I see what's happening now is we're not enforcing statewide the window tinting rules that we implemented back then. And some will say, it's just window tint. But if you understand the premise behind why we did what we did when we did it, it was one, to protect people, which is our job as law enforcement officers, and to protect the police officers, which is our job as chiefs of police. Chief Bob Shannon was my first chief in Hermiston. And it was, I think, about my second year at Hermiston PD when he became president of the Oregon Association of Chiefs of Police. He was gone all the time. Driving to Salem, he'd fill up 2 coffee pots. And I'm talking when air pumps first came out. So there are these big air pumps, and he'd put them in he had a Jeep Chief. It was called Cherokee Chief on the side of his Jeep. And he'd have us put those in his front seat, and he smoked cigarettes like a chimney, and he would start smoking and drinking coffee and head to Salem. At least once, I would say it was once a week, but maybe more often than that. And so he was my first introduction into what I learned is a chief's job, and that is to be involved in the association. So 3 years later, I find myself applying for the job as chief of police of a one-horse town called Erie, Oregon. And it was a EMT firefighter police job. So I had to wear 3 hats. And I just so happened, always wanted to be a fireman, had already been an EMT for Hermiston PD, and was already a police officer. So the job really worked out for me. And so in my police station, I had 6 fire trucks right next door to me, so it was kind of nice. Chief Shannon and Chief McCann were my sponsors. Tom McCann was the Stanfield, Oregon police chief, and now mayor. They both took me on my first trip to a chief's meeting, and it was the January meeting, which was back then called the Law Enforcement, the Chiefs and Sheriffs meeting. This was a long time ago. This was 1982, 83. 81, 82, sorry. And it was at the end of the 7th Mountain. And we rode in Chief Shannon's Jeep Cherokee Chief, which was a 2-door. And Mike, as the new chief, got to ride in the back seat. Well, that vehicle doesn't have windows back there. It's just got one big piece of glass. And then there's the two front windows. Well, Chief Shannon and Chief McCann both at the time smoked like chimneys. And of course, you know about the air pots and the coffee. So we had air pots and coffee, and they were smoking like crazy. Well, I'm not used to being around cigarette smoke. And by the time we got to Bend, I had probably asked half a dozen times for them to roll down the windows. Never once did they ever roll the windows down for me. I think it was some form of hazing or initiation. And I had 103 degree fever for the next 2 days and never got to attend any of the sessions because I was poisoned with tobacco. And that is not, I am not kidding. So that was my first conference as a part. That's when I first became part of the Chiefs Association. And then shortly after that, I got involved with the association as a member of the 911 committee, eventually became co-chair of 911, and then the legislative committee, and became co-chair of that in the 90s. And what I would say to anybody new coming to the association, you need to get involved in a committee or two. Don't overdo it, but make sure that you can do a pretty good job as a co-chair at some point, because not every committee needs to have someone who can be called upon to report on a particular factor, especially during the legislative session. So you can have a subject matter expert from that topic come to the Capitol at a short notice and talk to a committee of legislators who are working on a project. And it's just important. So that was my start, was Hermiston and then Irrigan. And I think probably having to be in front of a city council, you know, that's a pretty big step for a person when you go from being a police officer to a police chief. Now the whole council's looking at you to make the right call for your police department. Whether you're a one-horse town like I was or not, it's your budget, your community you're protecting. It's 2,000 residents, and you're their chief, and you need to take care of them. So you're going to write up a budget that you think, and you're going to use those chiefs of police in your area, like Eldon Olson, the chief of Umatilla. I went to him with my first budget and said, Eldon, this is what I've done. Can you help me? And he was 6 miles down the road. And he said, well, Mike, let me tell you one thing about budgets and police departments. Never, ever pad your budget. You do one time pad your budget, your city council will think from then on that everything you do is padded. So make sure that what you put in your budget is exactly what you need, plus or minus 10%, and that when you come to your council for more money later on, they'll trust you and they'll give you what you need if it's truly needed. So never pad your budget.
Great.
It's an integrity thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I've lived by that, and I've told other people that have followed in my shoes that you need to do that. After a career in law enforcement, I then went overseas and worked with the police mission that Ken Davis was involved in for our State Department and our Department of Justice. And when I came back, I spent some time as a Marine deputy working the Columbia River for 3 years, and that was a lot of fun. I mean, you get paid to drive a boat and run around on the river. It was great. But Candy said, finally, it's time for you to come home. So I came home, and I was asked by some local people to run for mayor of our hometown, the town I'd been the chief in the longest. And so I did. And we did some good things. It's not a vocation that I would think would be suited to everybody, and it certainly wasn't suited to me. But we did some good things. I think the town's a better town for the time that I spent on there. At least I think that's what we have to think. But I was honored to be mayor. Yeah, and I think the Chiefs Association my involvement and my history with the Chiefs Association was very important to my development as a leader. Just being a piece of the association, the organization, because in my time there were 246 cities. I don't know if it's that many now, but back in my time there were 246 cities, and I think about 210 of them had police departments, ranging from one officer, up to Portland. And I would have to say that I developed friendships and relationships with people from just about every size of law enforcement agency through my relations at the police academy, going through middle management, going through supervisory school, attending conferences and trainings for with the Chiefs Association, going to the International Chiefs Conference, learning from other states' police chiefs. There are so many handshakes that can go on in a lifetime that if you just take one piece from each one of those handshakes, you will be such a better police chief. And don't focus on the bad parts, because you'll see the bad parts in these people. Just focus on the good things, because even the people that have some fairly significant, questionable police ethics, they have some good ideas. You just have to be open to hear them. I've worked with New York City police officers. I've worked with police officers from other countries in my time. And we all have one thing in common, and that is to make wherever we live a safer and a better place for the people we work with and for our families primarily. Because if that's not what we're doing, then what are we doing? It's about our families and other people's families. Well, I would say that because the Chiefs Association shares its influence with other entities like DPSST and the sheriffs and the state police, all that training that we receive from them gets blended together and makes us all a better police officer and leader. So Chief Bob King and his wife, both dear people, would come to every conference, Chiefs Conference, with a new foster baby. Do you remember that?
Oh, yes.
And it would just make your heart melt. And so that's probably one of my most special memories of the Chief Conferences is when Bob and his wife would come with the baby, and we'd all dote over the baby. And that's really what it's about, Probably what was so remarkable for the Chiefs Association was when I was there during the transition. I started in the chairs in around 1995. And so I think one thing I can say with absolute certainty is that we took a step into the future around then when we found this group called the Victory Group. And literally, what happened to the Chiefs Association impacts us still to this day, is our reputation has gone from being, a single little office with one staff person doing everything she could do to keep all 200 police chiefs, in communication before the internet, to a time where we have the internet, the World Wide Web, and we have social media, we have a web page, and we have this group of people who've been with us through this process since 1995, who have raised the bar for us and for the state, literally for the state, in how we work with other agencies and our legislature. We've gone from here to there, and that's probably the most important thing that happened during my 4 or 5 years in the chairs. Police work is going to be the hardest job you'll ever love. The hours are long, the work can be dirty, it can be dangerous. You have to find a balance between your personal health and your family's welfare. and sometimes they don't work together too well. As far as safety goes, if you paid attention at the police academy and you listened to your field training officers and you performed as you did during your field training program and you were successful, then you should have, by most accounts, a complete and great career in law enforcement. I'm not saying that bad things don't happen to good people, because they do. But if you keep your head in the right place, keep your head in the game, come to work basically ready to work and leave the baggage at home, and consequently don't bring work's baggage home. Don't be afraid to talk about work, but don't lay the baggage from work at home at your spouse's foot. And remember, your spouse is there to support you, and you're there to support he or she. And don't expect things from your spouse that you wouldn't equally expect of yourself. I think most important, don't compromise your integrity for anything. If somebody comes to you and offers you something that you know is wrong, be a Chief Jim Souls. Lay it on them. I'm not going to do that, and I would never do that. That's Jim Souls, one of my mentors. I think one thing we all know is that being a police chief is not an 8-hour-a-day job. And to the degree that you can, try to be a part of the community that you are the leading police officer in. I see a trend that I don't think I like, and I see a trend where police officers aren't living in the communities in which they police for myriad reasons. But the fact is, we can't very well do community policing if you're not part of your community. And I'm probably a dinosaur, and younger cops and younger chiefs might come out and say, well, that's a load of BS, you can still do it. Yeah, you might, but you can't do as good a job, in my opinion. You've got to be living in that community to touch, taste, and smell what's going on. And quite frankly, you're the leader. The people want you to live with them. It's like being their protector, being their centurion, living and dealing with the problems and issues that come up with them.